This is it. This Clear Lake flood has wild waves. As debris is floating by, I look to you and question why. We thought we had found a lake paradise. Now it may be paradise lost. Wrecked a roof and fallen a tree. Flooding the creeks and raising the lake. The fear grows inside of me as we stare at a catastrophe. Thank God we're all alive. We're pressing on, still trying and not crying. We'll quickly recover and start fighting back. Picking up the pieces, we'll bounce right back. Greetings to you from Lake County, California. In 1997 and 98, our planet experienced some very unusual weather patterns, including the El Nino effect, which had disastrous consequences for us. I'm Dr. John Paul Jones, and my wife Myrna and I have owned waterfront property in beautiful Lake County since 1964. Since the mid-60s, I've done medical consulting on various civil engineering projects, beginning with the Bay Area Rapid Transit System, where extensive tunneling was performed under San Francisco. Now there's another engineering problem to be solved, and this one is in Lake County. On behalf of the many generous individuals and organizations supporting this civic event, we sincerely thank all of you for joining us at this Clear Lake Flood Symposium. This is a satellite image of Clear Lake from an altitude of 570 miles. Clear Lake is the largest natural freshwater lake located entirely within California. This lake is 18 miles long and over 7 miles in maximum width. About 465 square miles of watershed are drained by several creeks into this 64 square mile lake, which has a 100-mile-long shoreline. In my opinion, recurrent flooding is the single most important economic problem facing Lake County. For example, after the 1995 flood, there was a $400 million decrease in total assessed property valuation, which significantly eroded the tax base for essential Lake County services. On February 24, 1998, the lake reached a maximum height of 11.44 feet, the highest level in 89 years. This 1998 flood alone caused an estimated $12 million in structural damage. Many Lake County citizens are becoming increasingly angry. Basically, we have no significant flood protection. We want this flooding to stop. Clear Lake can be compared to your kitchen sink. The basic problem is that this sink, or the so-called Clear Lake Basin, can be rapidly filled up as by a very large pipe. This pipe is fed by several major creeks which can provide very high volume inflow to the lake. For example, during the 1909 flood, both Clover Creek and Middle Creeks overflowed their banks and severely flooded Main Street and Upper Lake. Unfortunately, Clear Lake is drained by only one very small pipe, which can therefore only provide low volume outflow. This small pipe is called Cache Creek, and this is the way it looked in 1895 at the present site of the Clear Lake Dam. The following presentation was prepared in collaboration with Thomas Smythe and Robert Locius of the Water Resources Division of the Lake County Department of Public Works, who have had extensive engineering experience with Clear Lake flooding. We will attempt to debunk some of the myths of flooding by presenting the facts to you. This is the dam for Hetch Hetchy Reservoir in Yosemite National Park. Under normal operations, many dams like this are constructed so that most water flows through the dam to the hydroelectric power plant, and the surplus water is discharged downstream. Flood water does not flow over the top of this dam. If flood water should suddenly rise behind this dam, the excess water simply runs over this spillway and is discharged downstream. It is no surprise that many people believe the myth that it is the Clear Lake Dam, which was built across Cache Creek in 1914, that is responsible for all of the flooding. This dam is currently owned and operated by the Yolo County Flood Control and Water Conservation District. Yolo County has the right to use Clear Lake water for irrigation between the levels of 0 feet and 7.56 feet, which is considered to be a full lake. There is a myth that the flooding problem can be completely solved by simply blowing up the dam. In fact, on November 16, 1868, many Lake County citizens were so angry about the severe flooding of Clear Lake extending all the way up to Main Street in downtown Lakeport that a group of vigilantes demolished the original Cache Creek Dam, which had been built near the present location of the Sleepy Hollow campground. Now it's 130 years later, and 1,200 Lake County homes have just been damaged. Clear Lake is maximally flooding at 11.44 feet, and only 5,615 cubic feet per second of water is seen discharging down Cache Creek from the Clear Lake Dam. The fact is that Clear Lake Dam is not the basic problem. This photograph shows lower lake flooding during the 1909 flood, when the lake was at 13.38 feet. The fact is that 7 of the 10 highest lake levels occurred between 1873 and 1914, before the Clear Lake Dam was even built. Actually, the maximum known flood level of Clear Lake occurred in 1890 at 13.66 feet. Another myth is that the Clear Lake Dam is like the Hidden Valley Lake Dam, where floodwater runs over the top of the dam and down the spillway. This photograph shows the forebay, which is the upstream portion of the Clear Lake Dam when it was under construction in 1914. The fact is that water flows through gates in the lowest part of this dam and not over the top of it. This is the downstream side of the Clear Lake Dam, also during construction in 1914. The fact is that water flows downstream through the bottom of this dam. In this picture, only gate number 4 is partially open, about 8 inches. And it is discharging only about 150 cubic feet of water per second, which is equivalent to about 1,100 gallons a second. However, this gate could be opened to 78 inches or 6.5 feet if necessary. At this time, all of the other 14 hydraulically operated gates are closed, and both spillways are also closed. The second major myth is that during a flood, all gates should be kept wide open. Opening all gates wide open does not really make a difference in the amount of water discharging downstream from the Clear Lake Dam during flood conditions. A flow test was performed in 1937-38. All 15 gates were fully opened. However, the lake continued to rise to a flood level of 10.2 feet in February 1938. Even though the peak inflow to the lake was 41,000 cubic feet per second. The peak outflow from the dam was only 4,255 cubic feet per second. This study concluded that the dam has a negligible impact on Clear Lake flood stages. Another flow test was performed on March 19, 1983, when the lake was flooding at 10.6 feet. The gates were opened, and the forebay water elevation at the dam was dropped to minus 3.5 feet, or a total drop of 14.1 feet below the lake level. But the dam still only discharged 4,800 cubic feet per second. However, this dam was designed for a discharge capacity of 21,000 cubic feet per second. So the Clear Lake Dam is clearly not the problem. During the 1998 flood, the monitoring equipment for determining the water discharges from the dam was completely destroyed. In the background, you can see the whitened tide mark levels on the rock, indicating the level of prior water discharges from the dam. The staff of the United States Geological Survey also monitors the dam discharges by dropping weighted instruments into the creek from this suspended cable system. Below the dam, Cache Creek descends through the rugged 30-mile-long Cache Creek Canyon, emerges into Capay Valley, meandering through the agricultural lands of Yolo County, and then flows through a settling basin into the Yolo bypass of the Sacramento River. Another myth is that during heavy rainfall, the maximum height that Clear Lake can rise in any one day is 6 inches. The fact is that in March 1995, water flowed into Clear Lake over 10 times faster than it could flow out through Cache Creek, and the lake rose over 1 foot in a day. The basic problem is the obstruction of the narrow Cache Creek outflow channel by a natural rock formation called the Grigsby Riffle, which is the tip of a large submerged basalt monolith. It is located just west of the Lake Street Bridge, where the muddy appearing Siegler Canyon Creek discharges into Cache Creek. This is the 1909 Lake Street Iron Bridge, which was replaced in 1987. The Grigsby Riffle is located immediately west of this bridge. The sand and gravel which is deposited over the Grigsby Riffle comes primarily from Siegler Canyon Creek. This photograph shows this shallow gravel bar many years before gravel aggregate was removed by Carl Brado Construction in 1983. In 1997, the sand and gravel over the Grigsby Riffle looked like this. At this time of year, creek water was only flowing in a narrower and deeper channel next to the northern creek bank. Excessive gravel was last removed from the riffle in 1997 to a level of 0 feet Rumsey as measured by a gauge at the Lakeport Pier of the Lake County Mosquito Abatement District. This photograph shows the excavator equipment of Michael Epidendio Construction, which is positioned on top of the Grigsby Riffle. And this photograph shows the large pile of gravel which has been removed from over the surface of the riffle. This aggregate is then being scooped up and loaded onto this truck. With all the gates of the Clear Lake Dam closed, the water level at the face or forebay of the dam is virtually the same as the water level of Clear Lake itself. However, the Grigsby Riffle is like a natural submerged dam which is located between Clear Lake and the Clear Lake Dam. When gates of the Clear Lake Dam are open, the Grigsby Riffle causes a bathtub-like sill effect by reducing the volume of water flowing downstream and discharging through the dam. To help explain this concept, this photograph shows a similar or analogous situation. The two dams at the left control the flow to the downstream dam on the right, similar to the way in which the Grigsby Riffle restricts water flow to the Clear Lake Dam. So the Grigsby Riffle is like having a natural dam before the man-made Clear Lake Dam. For example, at a flood stage of 11 feet Rumsey, Cache Creek can only deliver about 4,700 cubic feet per second of water, although the dam was originally designed to release 21,000 cubic feet per second. However, outflow at the dam often increases from 4,700 cubic feet to over 6,000 cubic feet per second because 7 creeks run into the Cache Creek channel between the riffle and the dam, including Copsey Creek, Herndon Creek, and Siegler Canyon Creek. In fact, a maximum discharge from the dam was recorded in February 1958 at 8,000 cubic feet per second when the lake level was at 9.4 feet. Since that time, the dam discharge may be increased to about 8,000 cubic feet per second for 1 to 2 hours if these creeks suddenly flood. During a heavy rainstorm, runoff water from these tributary creeks can actually cause a flow reversal, with water in Cache Creek then flowing upstream from the dam and towards the lake. Another common myth is that opening up the dam early will stop the subsequent flooding. The facts are that weather forecasting is only effective for about 3 days, and that rainfall precipitation forecasting has only limited accuracy. Furthermore, when Clear Lake is at a level of 7.56 feet Rumsey, only about 2,500 cubic feet a second of water can cross over the riffle and discharge from the dam, which only drops the lake 1/10 of a foot a day. If they open the dam 7 days ahead of the storm, this will only drop the lake about 8 inches a week. Clear Lake can rise more than 12 inches in a day during heavy rains. Therefore, lowering the lake 8 inches in a week is insignificant. The bottom line is that Lake County has no significant flood protection. However, if the weather forecast is wrong and the rains do not come, Clear Lake could be 8 inches lower all summer. Another myth is that a tree falling into Cache Creek markedly reduces outflow and causes flooding. The fact is that this outflow reduction would only occur with a log jam, which completely blocks Cache Creek and thus creates the effect of a natural dam. In this picture, the lake is about plus 3.8 feet Rumsey. Both spillways remain closed, but they will open up when the lake is full at 7.56 feet. In general, the spillways are now used primarily to evacuate and eliminate debris from accumulating behind the dam and obstructing the gates of the dam. In this picture, the pneumatically operated left spillway is open to the forebay water, but the manually operated right spillway is still closed. Even when the lake is not completely full and all the gates are closed, there's a very slight leakage of water downstream, mainly through the spillways. In summary, there have been several myths and considerable misinformation about Clear Lake flooding. Hopefully we have clarified many of these controversial issues. The next part of the program will discuss the problem of recurrent flooding, including the severe economic impacts to Lake County, and also suggest some physical and legal solutions to this problem.
Dr. John Paul Jones, Jr. is the chairman of the flood committee of the Clear Lake Rimlanders Coalition and also chairman of this flood symposium. Dr. Jones trained at the University of California in San Francisco as a rheumatologist and also as an orthopedic surgeon. Until recently, he was the president of the Association Research Circulation OSIUS, a group of about 200 research scientists, which is headquartered in Toulouse, France. Dr. Jones is an expert on osteonecrosis, a disease causing bone death, especially affecting the shoulders and hips of both deep-sea divers and compressed air workers. Dr. Jones provides consultations for various civil engineering projects requiring high-risk tunneling, in which the soil is saturated with groundwater. For example, after consulting on the Bay Area Rapid Transit, or BART project in the mid-60s, he worked on subway projects in Caracas, Venezuela, and Sao Paulo, Brazil. Dr. Jones is also an expert on bone marrow edema syndrome, a painful condition in humans which results from flooding the bone marrow space. In 1998, flood damage necessitated that he and his wife Myrna evacuate their home for several months as it was being rebuilt. Therefore, Dr. Jones has an increasing interest in hydraulic engineering, especially as related to flood prevention.
On behalf of the Clear Lake Rimlanders Coalition, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this flood symposium. It's nice to have a great turnout like this, and as Lake County citizens, we must really stand together to solve this problem which has been plaguing us repetitively for so many years now. Tonight we have a very distinguished panel of experts in several different fields, attorneys, engineers, insurance specialists, and economists that will be able to give you an overview regarding the severe economic impact of this recurrent flooding on Lake County, as well as develop some programs for essentially trying to solve the problem. Tonight we're honored with several local, county, and state representatives from a number of agencies, including the Northern California Department of Water Resources. We have about 25 of their members here that handle all water resources north of San Francisco. The Army Corps of Engineers is here, and we are honored to have the Yolo County Flood Control and Water Conservation representatives here as well. We have plenty of our own people as well, our engineers and our excellent legal department at the County Council's office here in Lakeport with Cameron Reeves and his staff. At this point, I would like to introduce the Master of Ceremonies for tonight's symposium, Paul Racine. Paul was a former president of the Clear Lake Rimlanders Coalition and has been instrumental in trying to solve this flood problem for over 20 years. He's a third-generation Racine from Fort Bragg, has raised his children here as Rimlanders with his wife Olga, and has a business called Racine Distributorship, which is on Soda Bay Road, and he's been an active businessman in Lake County now for over 30 years. So with no further ado, I'd like to bring Paul Racine back and have him introduce our first speaker.
Our first speaker this evening is Peter Windrum. Peter is a descendant of early Rimlanders on Clear Lake, and he grew up here. He is a lawyer. He's living on and working a farm near Kelseyville with his wife, Kathy. Mr. Windrum generated from UOP in 1965 and earned his law degree at University of Virginia in '68. He is a member of the California Bar Association and has been in active practice since 1971. His office is in Lake Fork. Mr. Windrum's practice emphasizes real property land, including water rights. Can't see. It's a lot better now. Mr. Windrum won 4 Canocti Harbor Inn in a suit brought by the County of Lake and finalized in the Court of Appeal in 1991. That case established Zero Rumsey as surveyed by the State's Lands Commission in 1967 as the low water mark on Clear Lake and as the common boundary between public and private land on the lake. The case also established the public trust easement around Clear Lake as the area between Rumsey 0 and 7.79. Tonight, Mr. Windrum will present a historical legal overview of Clear Lake. Mr. Peter Windrum.
Thank you, Paul. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be here this evening to present a historical legal overview of court decrees that relate to flooding on Clear Lake. To review very briefly the basic facts as to why and how Clear Lake floods, elaborating briefly on the excellent video presentation prepared by Dr. John Paul Jones. During heavy periods of rainfall, water pours into Clear Lake from its many tributaries, including Kelsey Creek, Middle Creek, Adobe Creek, and many others. Water pours out of Clear Lake through one natural channel, that being Cache Creek. The channel is naturally restricted in size because of a rocky outcropping in the bottom of the channel known as the Grigsby Riffle. This, I hope you can see, is a little kind of a diagram, a schematic, if you will. The water comes from the lake, goes over the Grigsby Riffle, and then after passing over the Grigsby Riffle, on downstream encounters the dam. Because of the naturally restricted channel, the water in Clear Lake rises rapidly until the creeks stop their heavy flow into the lake, and then the lake slowly recedes. Flooding on Clear Lake is the result of a naturally restricted outlet channel. It is not the result of the existence of the Clear Lake Dam. Efforts to enlarge the channel from Clear Lake began 85 years ago at the time that the Clear Lake Dam was constructed. In 1912, the Yolo and Water Power Company, the predecessor to the Yolo County Flood Control and Water Conservation District, the present owner of the dam, lawfully obtained a permit from the state of California to appropriate 300,000 miners inches of water from Clear Lake to be used for the irrigation of crops in the Sacramento Valley. The company was formed to serve an area of about 200,000 acres of farmland in the area of Capay, Woodland, Davis, and Winters. And in our diagram, we see here that area of the district as presently constituted is outlined in green. It is downstream on Cache Creek from Clear Lake. And the red lines that you see here is the system of irrigation canals developed by the district for the purpose of distributing water from Clear Lake to the farms in this area. At the time of the construction of the dam, in the years shortly thereafter, the company planned to increase the storage capacity of Clear Lake by raising its level behind the dam to 10 feet on the Rumsey Gauge. 10 feet is the height of serious flooding today. By 1920, the company had acquired overflow rights around half the shoreline of the lake. That made the other half of the shoreline of the lake extremely nervous. During the same time, from 1914 to 1920, the company was deepening and widening the Grigsby Riffle and channel from Clear Lake to the dam. In 1914, World War I began. And 2 years later, our government asked farmers to produce rice for the war effort. 10,000 acres of rice were planted in the area supplied by water from Clear Lake. Rainfall was light in the winter of 1917 to 18, and the lake soon dropped below the level of the Grigsby Riffle and stopped flowing down Cache Creek. To get water to the rice fields, Yolo Water and Power installed huge pumps in Clear Lake and pumped water over the Grigsby Riffle. By the summer of 1919, the lake was drawn down to minus 1.5 feet on the Rumsey Gauge, and then by 1920 was drawn down to minus 3.5 feet, the lowest level in recorded history on the lake ever, even lower than the level in the 1976-77 drought. Milos Gopsevic owned the Quercus Ranch in Big Valley and Konotei across the lake from that. The low water caused his docks to be standing with no water in their vicinity, and he said his orchards suffered because of the lack of water being drawn down from the lake, and it interfered with sub-irrigation of the orchards. He filed suit in 1919 in the Superior Court of San Francisco against Yolo Water and Power Company. He sought damages and an order enjoining Yolo and Water Power Company from dredging the channel between the lake and the dam any deeper, and from drawing the lake lower than its natural low water level. The suit was later moved to the Superior Court in Mendocino County. Other property owners joined the suit, including the Hotaling estate that owned all of Buckingham Point. It also owned Paradise Valley. George Ruddock joined the suit. He owned the entire peninsula between the arms of the two lakes. John Stubbs owned miles of lakeshore on the north shore of the lake. The county of Lake joined. Virtually every interest was represented in that lawsuit. Some participants, like Mr. Gopsevic, were most concerned about Yolo drawing the level of the lake down too low. Other participants were worried about Yolo raising the level of the lake too high. To resolve the dispute, the parties negotiated and agreed to a judgment that was announced in open court on October 7, 1920. It is known as the Gopsevic Decree. The decree sought to restore the operation of the lake, more or less, to its natural pre-1914 pattern, with one important exception, namely that the levels of the lake would not be allowed as high as they had been historically. The decree used the Rumsey Gauge in Lakeport as the standard for measuring the lake's level. Here, paraphrased, by the way, not in legalese language, are the orders of the Gopsevic Decree. First, Yolo Water and Power Company shall not allow the lake to go higher than 756 Rumsey, except for storms, and in that event, for no more than a 10-day period, and no higher than 9 feet. The storms we're experiencing, of course, now are higher than 10 feet, or the flood levels, and longer than 10 days. Secondly, Yolo Power and Water and Power Company shall not allow the lake to go below 0 Rumsey. 0 Rumsey is a very low level on the lake. Usually by the end of the growing season or the late fall, the level of the lake is around 1 foot. The Yolo Water and Power Company shall not excavate the channel between, in the outlet channel. By the outlet channel, again, we're referring to that area between the lake and the dam, more than 4 feet below 0 Rumsey. The company shall not draw down the lake faster than 2 feet per month, but it shall draw down water so the lake is at or below the following percentages of the April 18 level. In other words, the lake must be drawn down through the summer months, but not too fast. As an enforcement provision, the decree provided that if the lake were drawn down too low, the plaintiffs in the lawsuit could go back and construct a concrete barrier up to the level of 1 foot above 0 Rumsey. And if the dam fails, the structure could be built up to 2 feet above 0 Rumsey. As noted earlier, the object of the decree was to restore the fluctuation of the lake to its natural lows and highs, but to reduce the highs in the worst flood years. To accomplish that limitation, it was contemplated that the Grigsby Riffle, which had already been lowered about 3 feet from its natural level, would be lowered even further to minus 4 feet on the Rumsey gauge. This diagram that I've placed is a chart of the high levels of the lake shown by the blue lines and the low levels of the lake over the last 125 years, from 1873 to the present. The line at the top is the level of 9 feet, which was the limit imposed by the Gopsevic decree in 1920. The next line is 756, a full lake. This line below here is 0 Rumsey. And as you can see, of course, that the lake historically before that date regularly in 1920 regularly exceeded 9 feet, but did not do so for 18 years after entry of the Gopsevic decree. No work was done to lower the Grigsby Riffle between the Gopsevic decree in 1920 and 1968. Yolo Water and Power Company fell on hard financial times, and in 1927 the ownership of the dam, the water rights, and the improvements went to the Clear Lake Water Company. All was well until the winter of 1937-1938, just 60 years from last year's flood, when torrential rains raised the lake to 10.25 feet, high winds blew, and docks and piers and roads and bulkheads were damaged and destroyed, with an estimated damage of $700,000. Following the flood, the populace clamored for protection from high waters. Does that sound familiar? That event occurred on our chart here, is this peak at that point, which is 1938. The obvious physical solution to flooding was to lower the Grigsby Riffle and widen the channel, work contemplated by the Gopsevic decree, but never done. The county, the state, the Clear Lake Water Company joined forces, and excavation and dredging work began. 2 months later, Mary and Agnes Bemerly filed suit in the Yolo County Superior Court to stop the work. The Bemerlys owned 1,300 acres of farmland in the lower reaches of Cache Creek in the Sacramento Valley. Generally in this section, I truthfully don't know exactly where it is, but nonetheless it's in this lower reaches out here in the valley. And during that same winter of 1937 to 1938, when Clear Lake flooded so badly, they did too. Water came however, not so badly as the residents on Clear Lake. Water came within 75 feet of their house and barns, fences were torn out, and crops were destroyed. The Bemerlys in their lawsuit argued that if the outlet channel to Clear Lake were enlarged, even more water would come down Cache Creek, and they would be flooded and damaged more than had occurred in that previous 1937-38 storm. The trial court agreed and ordered the County of Lake and the Clear Lake Water Company, then the owner of the dam, to stop widening, deepening, or enlarging the outlet channel above the dam. That is to say, to do anything to the channel between the lake and Clear Lake Dam in this short area, and do anything to the Grigsby Riffle. The County of Lake appealed that decision. In 1942, the Court of Appeal upheld the trial court decision based on a finding that an enlarged channel outlet for Clear Lake without other protective measures would pour more water into Cache Creek and thereby flood and damage the Bemerley property. The decree was that all widening, deepening, or enlarging of the outlet of the channel of Clear Lake to the dam is prohibited. And it was based on that finding that you see here, namely it would cause damage to the Bemerleys downstream. And that finding was based on a report of the California Division of Water Resources that concluded that in order to prevent flooding on Lower Cache Creek and Clear Lake, in other words, both together, it was necessary first to construct Indian Valley Reservoir on the North Fork of Cache Creek. Secondly, improve the downstream channel on Cache Creek, meaning down toward the Bemerleys. And then thirdly, enlarge the outlet channel from Clear Lake to the dam. Obviously, the plan contemplated completion of Indian Valley Reservoir and downstream improvements on Cache Creek before enlargement of the outlet from Clear Lake. The Bemerley Decree took effect on December 2nd, 1942. It remains the law to this day. One other decree, the Solano Decree, deserves mention. And before addressing it specifically, let me point out again on this diagram. The sources of water to serve the Yolo County Flood Control and Water Conservation District project down in the Sacramento River is two sources. It's Clear Lake, and it is the North Fork of Cache Creek that does not come into Clear Lake, but passes Clear Lake. And in 1977, Yolo County completed construction of Indian Valley Reservoir on the North Fork of Cache Creek to supply more water downstream. Before completion, a dispute arose between Yolo County and Lake County over the operation of the dam on Clear Lake once Indian Valley Reservoir was completed. Lake County wanted Yolo to release water first from Indian Valley Reservoir and retain more water in Clear Lake during the summer recreation season. Yolo resisted restrictions on its authority to manage the dams as it felt best. As a final footnote to this project, as I was preparing this report and reviewing court decrees and historic records of the fluctuations of the levels of Clear Lake, I was struck by the observation that Clear Lake today raises and lowers through an annual cycle, including its high floods and its lowest moments, much as it has for tens of thousands of years. Before the arrival of our ancestors, my ancestors and yours, plants and animals and birds and fishes and native peoples living in and around the lake adapted their lives to that cycle. Despite efforts over the last 100 years to change the lake, the Gopsevic, Bemerley, and Solano decrees in conjunction have resulted in a lake whose annual fluctuations are not greatly changed from ancient times. Whether that will continue to be so, of course, remains to be seen. As we discuss flooding tonight and begin this very, very important discussion, I see us also beginning a debate over a more fundamental question, and that is, to what extent should we adapt ourselves to the age-old historic fluctuations of an ancient lake? And to what extent should we force the lake to adapt to us? Thank you very much. Good evening.
Our next guest, Caroline C. Constable, Clear Lake, California County Catastrophic Challenges Coordinator. She's also the garbage queen. If you go to many of our small counties around here, you'll see that our recycling program is better than anybody else's, and that's Caroline. I met Caroline when she organized and led the UC task force to attract a UC campus to Lake County. Caroline is a graduate of UC Santa Barbara. She majored in poli-sci and history. Caroline started improving Lake County 22 years ago by moving here. Her quality involvement in so many community affairs and government is legendary. In 1995, Caroline became the county's first emergency services coordinator. In 1996, Caroline was promoted to Deputy Public Services Director, which has 4 divisions: Parks and Rec, Recreation, County Facilities Maintenance, Solid Waste, that's Garbage Queen, and Emergency Services. She continues to work on emergency preparedness, response, recovery, and mitigation. I'm proud to introduce my friend, Caroline C. Constable.
Good evening. It's not too hard to figure out that garbage and disasters go together, so it is a pretty good fit. One of the things that we face whenever we go into a disaster every year, if we want to get help from the state and federal government, we have to be able to tell them that the disaster is such that it's beyond our capability. We also have to tell them that the damage is such that it qualifies for the state and federal levels. They don't just say it might flood, we'll help you. You have to actually show that there's some significant damage in the county. That's a harder task than you would realize. The people on the Rimland and the people along the streams know that their houses are flooding. They know that that water is approaching. In some cases, it may not be in their house, but it's eroding their property, destroying their landscaping, damaging or destroying their docks. A lot of different things that are hard to evaluate and put a price on. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some numbers of some ways we can potentially measure the economic impact that occurs in the county. And I haven't tried to use this thing before, so we're going to see how this works. The paper that you have on your table, the effects of flooding on the county economy, is something that I wrote when the county applied for a hazard mitigation grant program in 1995. And what I did since that time is I updated it to include some information from 1998. In order to come up with the information that's contained in these, I had to go back to about 1981, and I went through the county budget records to kind of get an idea of what the impacts are on our assessed value, our tax revenues, and other ways we can measure things. What you see here is the county, the county-wide, this is the County of Lake wide tax base, the total assessed value of land. And as you can see, it starts to grow, and it's significantly in the 70s when we had the boom up here and geothermal came in and the Homestake mine. Things were rapidly growing, as you can see, from 80 and 81 to 81 and 82. And again, our fiscal years run from July to July, so when we start looking at this, sometimes it's a little confusing to figure exactly where the flood is. When you get to 1986, 1983, 1986, 1995, and 1998 floods, you start to see some patterns that show up. They don't show up as well on this, so I have some others that will evaluate that a little bit. But as you can see, I need to get this over here a bit. We dropped down right near the flood in 1986, and again we dropped down in 1995. Now it doesn't look like a terrible thing on this because we're still growing, but let's look at how that compares and what that means in real dollars. This is the percentage change from one fiscal year to the next on assessed value. And what you'll see is that after the 1985 or 86 flood, the following year, the fiscal year that started in July of 86, we had a significant drop in this assessed value. And I'm going to tell you what that represents in dollars. There was a 14% drop, actually total assessed value, there was a 7% drop, which represented about $200 million in assessed value. When you get to the 1995 flood, now we have a $400 million drop, or 11% in your assessed property value. So if you're wondering why real estate was having a problem selling, it wasn't in your imagination. There's no question that there was a drop in the assessed value. All right, the next one I want to talk about is, again, related to the real estate and the sales that occur here and the property tax that goes with it. This is the property tax collected between about 1980 and 1998, the actual amount that was projected. And again, you'll see that there's a drop, significant drop, in the 1986 time, and there was an increase in 1995, but not significantly. There are some peaks and valleys, and of course there are other things that impact us as well here. Geothermal, the mine, the general economy, and the state and the federal government all have an impact. But on flood years, you can see that there is a pattern that this occurs. Now I'm going to show you again in the terms of the percentage of change. In 1985 and 86, the year following that, there was a drop, percentage drop in the amount of property tax that was collected. And again, in 1993 and 94, somebody else is going to have to explain that one. But we know that the economy here was struggling. And in the following years, there was a very small increase in what was happening here. But there are some significant drops in that. When your property value drops because you're tired of facing a flood, you're usually going to give your property away at pretty much of a fire sale price. And this is the property transfer tax that we have. And you'll see that what we have in 1985, following the flood, is a pretty high amount of property tax that was collected. To me, that reads people are selling their property. And thereafter, it dropped very far down. It was hard to sell. The same thing happened in the 90s during the recession, and in 1994 and 95, it was still pretty level. This year, or actually in the years following the 95 flood, things started to go back up as the economy started to rise, and we won't know until August or September of this year, when the final figures are in, what the effect of the economy, or what the effect of the floods were on the sale and the value of property in Lake County. Let's look at the percentage change on this one. It's pretty significant. The real estate business, the real estate brokers and agents, I think you could agree with this. You may not have been able to put it in figures, but it was countywide, and the impact was significant. There are other ways to measure this as well. These figures that I've shown you come in the fiscal year that follows the flood. There are other revenues that the county receives during the flood time that are also significantly impacted. And I'm going to go over a few of those. Sales tax. During a flood, there are many businesses that are isolated. You can't get to them. There are people that are having damage not only to their property but to their house. And so fewer people buy fewer things. We have less tourists come in, and they're buying fewer things as well. So you can see that again, in 1985 and 86, we dropped significantly. Tom Lincoln will be coming up here a little bit later and talking about what he's been able to find out through NFIP. But one of the problems we have, as I said before, is figuring out just how much and where the damage is. You may know where you are, but we don't. And even if you do, it's very difficult for you to tell us, or even be willing to tell us, what the amount of damage is. How do you put a number on the land, the landscape, the seawalls, the piers, the things that aren't insurable? How do you put a number when you don't know what's going to happen to the foundation of your home because it's been sitting underwater for 3 weeks and you don't know if the whole thing is going to have to be replaced? How do you put a dollar price on what you've lost in business loss because your business had to close, not because the business was flooded, but because you couldn't get to it and your customers couldn't get to it? How do you measure the impact of the extra time and cost that you have to go stay in a motel or take a detour to go to work? All of those are very difficult. We were able to get this year some information from FEMA, and we're getting a little bit more every year. We're getting some help now from our legislators in finding the right people in FEMA to give us some numbers. But I'm going to give you a few ideas on what we've had. I got a call from Brad Honorado yesterday from now Congressman Thompson's office, and we were complaining that not only Lake County, but all of the counties and cities in the state of California, and I assume throughout the United States, cannot get information from FEMA. Everyone calls into the registration line, or most everyone does, and they give the information about what damage they have, and they're put into various programs. FEMA collects that information. We know it's on a database. They have it by address. They have an idea of how much was paid out on NFIP claims, on individual family grant claims, on small business administration claims, but they won't tell us. They were telling us this was all confidential because it had a name attached. I really don't care the name attached, because I need to know where the property is. But that's been a real problem. Some of the numbers that they were able to give us, though, this came just yesterday from Brad Honorado. There are 79 what they call repetitive loss properties in Lake County. And Bob Locious may want to talk a little bit more about that. 50 of them are in the unincorporated area. 27 of them are in Lakeport, and 2 of them are in the city of Clear Lake. Repetitive loss just means it's happened more than once to the same property, and those people have gone ahead and filed claims under some program for the federal government. Some of the other things that help us try to figure out where we are, FEMA, during their reg line, puts you in the appropriate programs, or lets you apply to the appropriate programs. There were 1,490 households that registered with FEMA during the 1998 floods. So it's pretty close to what we think, that there were probably 1,200 to 1,500 homes that were damaged or where people had to leave. There were 1,100 people, or 1,100 families in Lake County that were put into that program. That's a significant number. There were 912 of these families that were turned over to SBA to try and go ahead and get an SBA loan. Those were both business and individual, because during a disaster, SBA loans to both. They're FEMA's disaster bank. And if you have, many of you probably know, if you go through FEMA and you register, the first thing you have to do is go through SBA. If they turn you down, there may be other programs, but they want to have you paying a loan. They want it to be a revolving account, and they want to make sure that it's not coming out of the taxpayer's pocket. So most of the loans that go to Lake County, or any county, are going to be in the form of an SBA loan. There was $1 million loaned to Lake County homes in the 1998 flood. There was $800,000 loaned to businesses in Lake County in the last flood. The last category after you find out that you can't be in an SBA loan if you can't qualify, or there are other things it doesn't cover, is called the Individual Family Grant Program. And that is a program that you do not have to return, but the average cost that you get out of that is maybe $200 to $1,000 max. In 1995, 250 households received a total of $250,000, about $1,000 apiece. Doesn't go very far when you're trying to repair your house and get on with your life. And in fact, I'll go into that in a little bit more. The other thing that they do is they have some help if your vehicle was damaged or destroyed in a flood, medical. They also require you to get NFIP insurance if you've been helped, and vehicle insurance if your vehicle is damaged or replaced. So they can help you. Some of the areas that flood in Lake County, they're not all along the Rimland. And I'm just going to read some numbers real quick. Most of them won't mean anything to you except if when the name of your community comes up. So in March of this year, the SBA applicants fell in this kind of category. Clear Lake, 145. Clear Lake Oaks, 154. Clear Lake Park, 28. Cobb, 5. Glen Haven, 8. Kelseyville, 34. Lakeport, 267. Lower Lake, 28. Lucerne, 38. Middletown, 7. Nice, 57. Upper Lake, 19. And Witter Springs, 1. So we have flooding a lot of different places beside the Rimland, but you can get an idea of where the major impacts are. There's a few other things I want to touch on before Tom comes up here, but most of them are in your packet. The main thing is that we're trying to put a dollar number. We know that we're having some economic loss. Some of that is also very intangible. How do you measure the amount of algae that comes in? How do you measure the press, the negative press that we get, and the cost it causes the resort and homeowners to have to re-advertise and reconvince people that we're a viable and beautiful place to visit. And then the final thing you have is that because of the low income in this area, there are many people who can't repair their property here. The high welfare rate, the low income rate, the high senior rate precludes many people from repairing their property, which makes it that much harder to sell. One of the problems we ran into in the 1997 flood is that many of those people who had damage were in fact denied not because they didn't have damage, it was because their houses weren't built to code. The room that was attached without a permit was not eligible. So we have a lot of different problems like that. I'm just going to conclude by saying that the information that I've given you tonight is what we hope will tell other people that we have a cost-benefit ratio that is necessary to pursue any project that might be selected to be pursued on this. Thank you very much for your attention.
Our next speaker is Tom Lincoln. He was worked into the program when we found out he had a lot of useful information to disseminate to you tonight. Tom began his career in insurance in 1977. For several years before that, he'd been a newspaper reporter in Asia and the United States. In 1984, Tom became one of the 6 principals in Northwest Insurance and is the corporate treasurer. Also in 1984, Tom opened the Lakeport branch and employs 6 people. Mr. Lincoln writes many types of commercial insurance, and he represents the entire company in his specialty field, which is financial institutions. Tom is a member of Professional Liability Underwriters Society and recently earned the Registered Professional Liability Underwriters designation. Mr. Lincoln's wife, Ruth, is Administrative Dean of Mendocino College, Lakeport Center. They have 5 children. Tom is active in community affairs, most notably trustee Sutter Lakeside Hospital 84 through 96, and he was chairman of the board from 90 to 94. Currently a board member of Holy Family Catholic School, and he was chairman of the board there from 95 to 98. He's a past president of the Greater Lakeport Chamber of Commerce, an active Rotarian, and he was the president of Rotary from 92-93. Tom's a close friend of mine. I would trust him with my wife. I would trust him with my life, but I would not trust him with an open bottle of Merlot. Tom Lincoln.
Thank you, Paul. And thank you to the organizers of tonight's event for allowing me to participate. If you haven't figured out why you're all here tonight, it's because, like Mr. Gopsovic, J.P. Jones finally got mad as hell and said he wasn't going to put up with it anymore, and he's invited us all here to try and create a solution. As was mentioned earlier, several people tried to obtain information from FEMA and from the National Flood Insurance Program on claim data for the Clear Lake Basin over the last several years, and most particularly for 1998, for the flood event of 1998. Nobody was successful, and when I heard that, I volunteered to see if I could find out how to gather that information. Now, that's a strange title from an insurance agent saying that flood insurance is not the answer, but believe me, having witnessed flood insurance in action over the years, it really is, it's a very nice resource that we have, but it certainly is not the best answer to the problem that we face here in the Clear Lake Basin. The National Flood Insurance Program has been in place in Lake County since 1978. So the information that they have is both cumulative from 1978 to 1998, and then I also have information that's specific to the 1998 flood event. But the information is very interesting, and I think you'll see from these numbers that there's been a significant impact on the local economy and particularly on local property owners over this period of time. What this slide shows is the number of claims that have been filed from property owners in the city of Lakeport from 1978 to 1998. It also shows the total coverage that's in force that was cumulatively in force over that period of time. It also shows the insured property value. That's the total value of the property that's insured. The losses sustained, in other words, those are the values of all losses sustained over that period of time in the city of Lakeport that were insured. As you can see, it was $2.9 million. The insurance reimbursement was $2.4 million over that time. So several people were out of pocket several $100,000 over that period of time. And this is the unincorporated area of the county. This would comprise a significant number of rimlanders. 820 claims from 1978 to 98. $70 million in total coverage that's been provided over that period of time. $110 million in property value that was insured. Losses sustained, $10.9 million, and losses paid, $7.5 million. A much more graphic display of the disparity between the loss suffered and what is paid out in insurance reimbursement. And this just shows the totals for that period of time. Over $14 million in losses and $10 million in insurance reimbursement. Here we have the 1998 totals alone. And what I find significant about this number is that it essentially represents almost 50% of the amount that's been paid out from 1978 to 1998. So the flooding event of last year was a significant event, and it just shows you that as time goes on, claims become more expensive, and the economic loss to the county is much, much more significant. This just it gives another graphic depiction of the total number of claims, 1978 to 98, as opposed to the 1998 year by itself. 1,172 claims over that period, and in 1998 alone, there were 466. And this is what I find really extraordinary, is when you compare the losses that we suffered in 1998 with the losses suffered by all of Northern California in that flood event. As you can see, we represented almost 20% of the insured losses in all of Northern California. Now, when you compare that to the entire state of California, it's 13% of National Flood Insurance Program claims paid. That's a significant number. What these numbers don't show is the rest of the story, and it really plays into my belief that flood insurance is not the answer to the problem we have here. There are a lot of things that are not covered by flood insurance. First and foremost is the deductible. Everybody has a deductible that they have to be out of pocket before flood insurance steps into the picture. There's also co-insurance penalties, or penalties for not carrying enough coverage on your property. They're going to reimburse you in a different manner if you don't carry enough coverage than if you carry the amount of coverage that's prescribed by the policy. They don't pick up such things as loss of use. If you have to live elsewhere temporarily or conduct your business from a temporary location, they're not going to reimburse you those expenses. They're also not going to pay for the increased cost of access to your property, or the fact that you may not be able to access your property. They're not going to pay for any business interruption expenses. If you're out of pocket income because you can't conduct your business, or business is reduced significantly because of the flooding event, they're not going to reimburse you those out-of-pocket expenses, nor are they going to pay for any loss of business opportunity. They're also not going to pay for the increased cost of construction if you have to upgrade your property to conform to current building codes. And there's many other economic losses that are not covered by flood insurance and have to be borne by the individual, or they have to look to other sources of either low-interest loans or grants or whatever they can find to help offset these costs. And then, of course, there's ineligible property. Flood insurance is designed primarily for buildings with 4 walls and the contents within those buildings. Frequently, things like docks and piers and other types of appurtenant structures to property are not eligible for coverage under the program. Then there's other hidden costs, or costs that aren't really associated with the program at all. Government property damage, very significant in this county, particularly in 1998, and in the previous flooding event, I believe it was 1997, which wasn't necessarily basin damage, but it was creekway and streamway damage that was caused by high waters. Law enforcement costs, significant in this county. There's a tremendous amount of additional law enforcement efforts employed as a result of these types of natural disasters. Emergency services costs, ambulances, fire departments, etc. Health and safety challenges. I mean, we're still dealing with some of the health-related issues of Clear Lake that have negative tourism consequences, septic tanks overflowing into the lake, etc. Of course, agricultural losses, and that, as Caroline explained earlier, there's a definite impact on the assessed value of property and the tax collections by local government, which we depend very heavily on. Again, I'd like to thank the organizers for allowing me to participate. I hope this information, in and of itself, it's not all that useful, but I'm hoping that when we combine it with all the other information that's being brought to the table tonight, hopefully we'll be able to develop something that we can move forward with, go to the federal government, the state government, and other sources of relief to make some meaningful changes to the Clear Lake Basin and hopefully avoid what used to be a 100-year event, but it seems like it's been 400 or 500-year events in the last 20 years, and that's unacceptable. Thank you.
Our next speaker this evening is Robert Aloysius. Bob graduated from Clear Lake High School right here in Lakeport. He got an appointment to West Point, graduated with a BS in General Engineering in 1972. In 1985, Bob received a MA Personal Management/Administration from Central Michigan University. In 1997, Bob retired from the military and returned home and accepted the position of Deputy Director of Public Works, Water Resources. Water resources include flood control, water conservation, and lake bed management. Robert?
Well, thank you very much, Paul. And again, like the other speakers, I would like to thank Dr. Jones for taking this effort on. I'd like to thank him for that, but I'd like to thank him for a second part. I know most of you have seen the flyers that have been passed around, and everyone had a chance to look at it. And I hope you noticed on the back there that he advertised that we would be live speakers. I would hope that after this is over, we're live when we go home. So again, Dr. Jones, thank you. I'm going to throw up a couple slides here and talk a little bit about some solutions that have been looked at over the last many years at ways that could resolve the Clear Lake flooding problem. I'm going to throw up what I'm going to call quotable quotes, and I'll let you look at that for a minute, and I guess any quote's quotable, but the point I wanted to make, and I'll let you read through that for a second. Those in the back that are old and can't see, and it never failed that during the dry years that people forgot about the rich years, and during the wet years they lost all memory of the dry years. It was always that way. East of Eden, John Steinbeck. Let me talk about some recent history just so it sets some background and where I'm going to head with this. In 1981, the Army Corps of Engineers were doing a study that recommended that the outlet channel, 3.3 miles of outlet channel, be widened and a 1.1 mile bypass be put around the Grigsby Riffle that essentially goes through what we now know as Anderson Marsh and through that area. There was a great resistance about putting that bypass through the archaeological sites and the other parts of the Anderson Marsh. And in 1986, the Water Resources Development Act authorized the outlet channel without the bypass. By the time they went through the studies and got to 1990, the Corps recommended not to approve the project because the cost of the project exceeded the benefit. And that's called the benefit-cost ratio. And you're going to see that a lot in the charts I have here because that, from the economic side of it and the ability to get funds from the federal government are based on the benefit-cost ratio. And what that essentially does is they take a look at the cost of the project and go out a number of years, and I'll talk about that in a second, and look at the benefit received by that project. And for example, they normally look at a 50-year period or a 100-year period and look out to see what the benefit will be versus the cost. And if the cost is worth the benefit, you're at 1 or above. In this case, the benefit was below 1. At that point, the Lake County Flood Control Task Force was put together, much like you're going to see that occurred here in 1998, to address some of the issues and to come up with some solutions. They met, there were a number of folks that are in this room today, in fact, that were part of that committee. And what they wanted to do was to look at possible solutions, provide that to the Corps of Engineers, and have them go through a reconnaissance study and look at all the different possible ways of eliminating or reducing the flooding around the lake. And that's what I'm going to go through here in a minute, is that 1992 Corps reconnaissance study, which is going to show you the number of things that people have looked at through the years. And I'm not going to tell you to pick one of those or pick another one. I'm just going to tell you what was done in the past, and some of these could be readdressed. Again, there were just recommended solutions at the time. In 1998, after the floods, the Clear Lake Advisory Subcommittee formed another flood control committee, and some of those folks are in the stands today, and are in fact part of the Rimlander Association that have put this flood symposium together. As I indicated, the 1992 Army reconnaissance study did this. It investigated flooding and related resource problems in the upper Clear Lake Basin. These are the number of solutions they looked at, and I'll go through these quickly to give you an idea why they were not selected or why they weren't didn't go any further than they did. A detention basin, upstream storage, outlet channel improvements, modification of the operation or structure of the dam, pump storage, and some non-structural solutions. The first one is a detention structure. They looked at building a detention structure in what's now called, as you know, is the reclamation area vicinity of Upper Lake and the Rodman Slough. As it indicates there, they were talking about some significantly high levees with a flood protection that doesn't give you much, about 7/10 of a foot for a 100-year flood event. The cost to build those levees alone was over $25 million, and the BC ratio on that ultimately came out to 0.4, and it wasn't considered further. And I will tell you again that these costs are 92 figures, so the cost is probably greater today. Of course, the benefit might be a little more, so the ratio might stay relatively the same. But I will tell you, having worked up there this last winter with those levees, as you all know, those levees, we have problems now being able to keep those levees at the heights they're supposed to be. I can't imagine trying to add 10 feet more of fill on those, because they'd probably continue to sink. They looked at several alternatives on upstream storage. There was a thing called the Pomo Dam that was on Kelsey Creek. You can see how that resulted. There was a discussion of building a series of dams all around the county that would ultimately hold 200,000 acre feet. You can see the cost was extremely high, and the benefit cost ratio wasn't even close to an acceptable rate. The other one was Lakeport Dam, and at the time they were doing this study, they didn't consider it because it was already dying at that point. It had been deferred, as I indicate there, because of local interest, and then it was ultimately canceled. So that project wasn't looked at in 1992. They looked at some outlet channel improvements. The one that I had indicated before, which was at 3.3 miles and the 1.1 mile bypass, not only was it benefit cost ratio not good enough, there were some environmental concerns and archaeological concerns and some great there was a large number of people out of the state parks and whatnot did not want that bypass to go through the what became Anderson Marsh Park. So they looked at just enlarging the outlet channel. They looked at several solutions. One of these was a project that was moving down the road fairly well. This was one where they were going to widen and deepen the channel. This project survived till the early 90s when they got through to the main feasibility study. It was determined that the benefit-cost ratio was such that it was not a feasible project, so it died. And that's the one that I showed. It died in 1990. As I go through these, what I show you is just the benefit-cost ratio. The other part of this has been addressed by Peter and others is the decrees and other things that would have to be changed or modified, which is a whole nother world if you go in there and do anything to widen or deepen these channels. The Grigsby Riffle is an interesting one. I would, as you think about that one, and you think about taking out the natural rock formation that creates this lake that's been around for, as some say, for 2 million years, there's a danger when you take out that riffle. It allows this lake to be, or could allow this lake to be drawn down to below a point that would not be acceptable either. So there's a danger when you talk about widening and deepening these channels. The modification of the operation of the Clear Lake Dam, that one has been fairly well discussed by Peter and the others, but that one did not get looked at real seriously because those decrees also protect the people in the rimland to ensure that they have a lake that's acceptable during the summertime. So that one, for the reasons listed on there, didn't go any further. So that covers what I had. I again want to thank Dr. Jones and thank you for late in the evening putting up with me going on about the different things that didn't survive. Hopefully I will. Thank you.
Our final guest speaker for this portion of the program will be Edward Bronson. Ed was admitted to the law practice in 1953. His practice has always been civil litigation. He was a senior partner in San Francisco, LA firm of Bronson McKinnon. From 1978 to 1994, he was in charge of the Lakeport branch office of his firm with 5 lawyers. His formal retirement from his partnership was in 1994. Currently, Ed is doing part-time work of counsel at Crump, Berkler, and Lavelle. Ed is past president of American Board of Trial Advocates, past president, Northern California Association of Defense Counsel, and a fellow of American College of Trial Lawyers. Ed is going to present information on the decrees on Clear Lake. Mr. Ed Bronson.
You've heard a number of references to the Yolo Power Company and the Clear Lake Water Company and the Yolo Flood Control District. So we're clear on this. The dam was built in 1914, and the company at that time was the Yolo Power Company. The Clear Lake Water Company, which was a privately held company, in the 1940s took over the ownership and the operation of the dam. In the 1960s, there came along the Yolo Flood Control and Conservation District, which is the company which now operates the dam. What I'll be talking about is civil litigation that has transpired since 1938 up to the present time involving breaches of the Gopsovic and/or the Bemerley decrees. There are essentially three kinds of civil litigation that can arise. The first is a suit for money damages by people who have been damaged by flooding as a result of the lake being higher than either 7.5 or 9, the flood stage on the Rumsey gauge. The second is a suit for contempt. The Bemerley and the Gopsovic decrees are injunctions, and a violation of an injunction is a contempt, and the punishment for a contempt is a fine, or if it's an individual, it may be a jail sentence. The third thing we'll be talking about is a modification of a decree, the Gopsovic and the Bemerley. And so those are the three types of litigation that I'll be talking about. The first thing that happened along this line came in 1938 when the lake got to 10.25 on Rumsey, and a suit was brought by Lake County for contempt against Yolo County. In other words, Lake County was saying that Yolo County, let's see, 1938 would be the Yolo Power Company, had permitted the lake to get too high, and therefore they should be held in contempt. That suit ended up in a dismissal. The trial court held that you can't have an innocent violation of a decree resulting in a fine or otherwise a contempt. In 1940, the lake got to 9.6, which of course is over 9. 1956, the lake got over 9.5. As far as I know, there were never any damage suits for property damage as a result of those floods. In 1958, 57, 58 floods, where the lake got to 10.86. There was an attorney in Oakland named Cliff Hildebrand who had a trout farm down below Middletown, and he came up and he had meetings around the county, and he collected 60 people who had been damaged by those floods, and he brought in Lake County a class action, which is a suit on behalf of the 60 people that he had as clients, on their behalf and on behalf of all people similarly situated. In other words, that had been damaged. I didn't live in Lake County then, and I was hired to defend the Clear Lake Water Company, so in a way I've got a different interest today than I did then. But anyway, what happened eventually was the judge in I think it was 1959 when we were coming up to court here, was Ben Jones, who was a famous guy, and he owned a whole bunch of land on the lake, so we tried to disqualify him because he was an interested party, and he refused. Anyway, we presented the papers to him. He eventually disqualified himself, and we had a judge named Reagan from Colusa County come over, and he heard our case, and he eventually dismissed it. Now, remember, we're talking about 1958, and we're talking about 60 people who had substantial damage, and not only on their behalf, but also all the other people who were similarly damaged. And the judge dismissed the case and ruled in favor, therefore, in favor of the Clear Lake Water Company, then operating the dam, on the basis that the simple, innocent violation of a decree such as Gopsovic, by permitting the lake to get over 9 feet, could not be the subject of a civil damage suit. Then we get to 1983 and 1986, of course, were the big flood years where the lake got to 11.3. Both years was almost identical, Rumsey measurements. In that same year, the county hired Carl Brado, who's here this evening, to clear out the channel. It had accumulated a lot of debris, and also the Seidler Creek and other channels that come into Cache Creek below the dam had created an impediment to the flow of the water to the dam. So anyway, Carl. Well, Yolo County turned around and sued Lake County, for contempt of court on the basis that the County of Lake's action in clearing out the channel amounted to a contemptuous action, and there should be some civil penalty. Our existing county counsel, Cameron Reeves, went down to Yolo County and successfully defended that case. Again, it was on the basis that the action of Lake County was innocent and that there could not be any contempt finding on the basis of an innocent violation of an injunction. As a result also of the 1983 and 86 floods, there were several suits for damages, much the same as the 1958 case, which was unsuccessful. The 1983 and 86 cases for damages were also unsuccessful. So as far as the civil litigation for contempt and for money damages, going back years and years, it has all been unsuccessful. 2 attempts at contempt citations have been unsuccessful, and all the suits for money damages have resulted in 0. We came very close, I think, to a solution to all of this with the work that the Corps of Engineers did that started in the 1970s. And the idea, of course, was to alleviate flooding. And they worked for many years, and they came up with 2 potentially feasible solutions. One was the bypass that I'm sure you've all read about. The other was to lower the Grigsby Riffle. They recognized, the Corps of Engineers, that also they would have to take mitigation measures down in Yolo County in the form of riprap and whatnot to take care of erosion for the property owners on Cache Creek below the dam. They came up with a cost estimate that in the early 80s looked very feasible for federal funding. At this point, Cameron Reeves and his staff got geared up to do what a great many people still say is the really only solution here, and that is to modify the Gopsevic and the Bemerly decrees. Such a modification would take 3 things. The first is a plan. Well, in the late 1980s, they had a plan that the engineers came up with, and they settled on not a bypass, but rather settled on lowering the Grigsby Riffle, and for mitigating circumstances for the property owners down in Yolo County. Federal funding was available on the basis of the cost figures that the engineers originally came up with. The third thing, and this is where we get complicated today, is that we have to show, in order to modify a decree, that there have been changed circumstances. In other words, when the judges made their decrees in 1940 in Bemerly and in 1920, I guess, in Gopsevic, there were certain circumstances that existed in Yolo County and in Lake County, and there were different interests both in this county and in that county. And putting all that together, in the circumstances that existed, they came up with these decrees. Now, for a judge to modify those decrees, there's got to be some changes in circumstances. Well, we know that we have one, and that is the Indian Valley Dam. And of course, we know now that there's a tremendous amount of more damage that occurs in Lake County than occurred years and years ago. And there's also a number of other changed circumstances. But to modify a decree today, there would also have to be notice to Fish and Game, to the water boards, to the environmental agencies, and to every other governmental, state and federal, that have an interest in this type of thing. But it all seemed to be in place in the late 1980s, and Cameron Reeves will tell you that they were ready to go. They thought they had it all in place to modify the Bemerly and Gopsevic decrees to permit the Grigsby-Riffle to be lowered, which, of course, as you know, would permit more water out of the lake, and to take the mitigating measures which would be necessary downstream. Well, what happened in the first part of 1990s was the Corps of Engineers came out with new cost figures which blew the financing and funding out of the water. So right now, we're back to ground zero, except we know what it would take to modify a decree. And I think with the work that can be done in that regard, those decrees can be modified and the Grigsby-Riffle can be lowered. So, thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Now we'll start the question and answer portion with our panel of experts, including Tom Smythe, who trained as a civil engineer at the University of Nebraska and obtained a master's degree in environmental health engineering from the University of Kansas in 1982. Tom moved to Lake County in 1987 as a water resources engineer, providing his services to the Lake County Flood Control District. And he administers the county's National Flood Insurance Program. Tom is also past president of the Lake and Mendocino Engineers Association. Now we have a question for Arnie Hansen. He's the fourth one down. Arnie is the current president of the Lake County Rimlanders Association. He's a general contractor that built this very showroom here at Konocti, has done practically all of the major renovations for Konocti Harbor, and a considerable amount of waterfront property he has built here in Lake County. Arnie, can you tell us something about the Clear Lake Rimlanders Coalition, what its composition is, and so on?
In 1994, a group of concerned property owners got together to discuss the need to form a group. Laws were being passed constantly affecting our property rights and how we can use our property. Old existing laws were being reinterpreted. The public trust issues were arising and still in question. In August of '94, we adopted a board of directors, voted a board of directors, adopted the Articles of Organization, and formed the Clear Lake Rimlanders Coalition. Our county is unique. They not only want citizens' input, but they actually actively solicit it. And through our membership, we now represent rimland property owners on various committees. We have standing committees within our organization, keeping an eye on things that could affect your property. Flooding keeps coming up as one of the major concerns of our membership, and that brings us here to tonight.
Okay, thank you. We have a question here for Peter Windrum. Can Lake County buy out the Yolo County people and gain control of the lake?
I suppose we probably should ask one of the representatives from Yolo County who is here this evening, is it for sale? The answer is legally no. Can you compel it? No, you cannot. Lake County cannot buy out Yolo County. It's a public agency, a public entity, and you cannot forcefully one public entity buy out another public entity.
Here's a question for Tom Smythe. Has anyone looked into the possibility of a government buyout of property owners who have experienced repetitive flooding?
I'm not aware of any such case in Lake County. It has been done in other areas. Sonoma County is doing that right now in Guerneville. They received some money from FEMA from the 95 floods.
The question for Peter Windrum, they say that violation of the decree is an elevation of Clear Lake above 9 feet or above 7.56 feet for 10 days. What is the correct interpretation of the Gopsevic decree?
The correct interpretation is that it's a violation of the decree if the level of the lake exceeds 7.56 for more than 10 days. It's the disjunctive. In other words, if it's more than 7.56 for more than 10 days, it's a violation. If it's more than 9 feet, it's a violation. So they're two separate
So the lake can never legally be higher than 9 feet. Is that correct?
That's correct. By the terms of the Gopsevic decree. Now, of course, it's impossible, as we know, the lake exceeds that. But the decree says it never not higher than 9 feet, and between 7.56 and 9 feet in that range for no more than 10 days.
Well, this is a question for the entire panel. How many times in recorded history have these decrees been violated? Does anyone have any idea?
Give me a second.
Peter's
put that chart
researching
that
that now.
of 9 feet.
I'll take a stab at it. From what I understand, the decree says it cannot go above 9 feet or above 7.56 for more than 10 days. The problem is, it's physically impossible to comply with the decrees, and that's what Mr. Bronson was saying is why those suits were dismissed, because it's innocent violation, I think, was the terminology used.
My wife and I recently toured a couple of the flood-prone areas in Clear Lake where about every third or fourth home has a for sale sign on it. And many of these people are having to discount these homes up to 50% to sell the property. Is this your experience as well based on these figures?
I think that we'll see a little bit more when we see the next county budget to see what the property tax transfer rate is, but that certainly has seemed to be the issue that we have. And it's not just that people are selling it, some of them are walking away from their bank loans, and the banks are taking that loss.
Another question, this is for Tom or Caroline. Besides flood damage, foreclosure is bringing down house values around the county at this time, which could also be affecting property tax revenues and bringing a reduction in county money coming into the county. Are you seeing an increased number of foreclosures?
I would have to defer to somebody from the banking industry. I don't have any information on that. But about the only thing I could say is every time that somebody loses money from a sale or damage to their property, it's money they're not spending somewhere else. And I think the conservative estimate is that money goes around somewhere between 3 and 7 times. If you don't buy the materials or services that I have, then I can't pay employees who in turn can buy the materials and services you have. The county cannot hire people and pay wages that can buy other services. So the foreclosure doesn't just necessarily impact the people who are flooded, but the county as a whole as well. So the bulk of the properties are going to be along the rimland, and so there would be a higher percentage that would fall in that category.
Okay. Another question, this is for Tom or Caroline. Besides flood damage, foreclosure is bringing down house values around the county at this time, which could also be affecting property tax revenues and bringing a reduction in county money coming into the county. Are you seeing an increased number of foreclosures?
I would have to defer to somebody from the banking industry. I don't have any information on that. But about the only thing I could say is every time that somebody loses money from a sale or damage to their property, it's money they're not spending somewhere else. And I think the conservative estimate is that money goes around somewhere between 3 and 7 times. If you don't buy the materials or services that I have, then I can't pay employees who in turn can buy the materials and services you have. The county cannot hire people and pay wages that can buy other services. So the foreclosure doesn't just necessarily impact the people who are flooded, but the county as a whole.
Another question for the panel. We've heard for many years how Yolo County has been impacted downstream because of the flooding and the large discharges. And in fact, we have had discharges of 8,000 cubic feet a second for 1 to 2 hours momentarily during these floods. But we don't have any accurate figures from Yolo County, do we, on the actual financial impact of our flood here in Lake County in proportion to the financial impact on Yolo County? Does anyone have any figures? Have you contacted the Yolo County people to see exactly in a dollar amount how they've been financially impacted by these floods?
I'm not aware of any such figures.
This is a question for Tom Smythe. We understand that the effect of evaporation of water from Clear Lake is about 3 feet reduction in the lake level during the summer. And yet they say that Yolo County owns all the water from 0 to 7.56 feet. How is the calculation made for this evaporative loss?
I won't get into the actual mechanics of it. You'd all leave. That is taken care of with the Solano decree. It was very carefully calculated out, which allows for the 3 feet of evaporation during the summer, and it allows a certain amount of water to be actually used, released for Yolo County's use, and that amount actually decreases as the lake is lower. If it doesn't fill to 7.56, they get less water.
Okay, with that, we'd like to wrap up the panel discussion and question and answers. On my behalf, I'd like to thank all of you personally for joining us here for the Flood Symposium. You can rest assured that we will be standing in your defense united to solve this problem. We'll be working together. We have no flood protection in Lake County whatsoever at this time. We want this flooding to stop. We want it to stop as soon as possible. We want it to be funded expeditiously by our local, state, and federal elected representatives. Thank you very much.